In 1989, 5 children vanished during a Labor Day picnic in a Texas state park. Their families searched the woods, police drained the lake, but no bodies were ever found, only a lone tricycle near the edge of an old stone well. 36 years later, a drone pilot scanning the abandoned park for a YouTube series captures something submerged in the shadows of that very well, and what investigators pull from the mud reignites a case long believed buried forever. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe for more cinematic true crime mysteries, found evidence stories, and psychological thrillers that unravel one layer at a time. August 30th, 2025. Location: Hollow Creek State Park, Texas. The drone buzzed softly overhead, its shadow flitting like a dragonfly across the dry, sun-cracked grass. Below, the landscape spread wide and desolate, an expanse of abandoned picnic tables, rusted barbecue pits, and the scattered skeletons of old pavilions slowly losing their battle with time. The park had been officially closed since 1991, but even before that, no one really came anymore. Not since the disappearances. Trevor Lance squinted at his screen, adjusting the camera angle from his perch on a boulder near the old ranger station. The air was thick and still, cicadas screaming in the distant trees. His YouTube series, Forgotten Grounds, had taken him to dozens of overgrown campsites, shuttered amusement parks, and condemned fairgrounds across Texas. But this place felt different. Hollow Creek wasn't just decaying, it was waiting. He maneuvered the drone over the dry gulch that had once been a shallow stream and followed it to the heart of the park, a circular clearing surrounded by leaning trees. There, in the center, sat the crumbling remains of a concrete well. No roof, no rope, just a black mouth yawning in the center of the earth. He remembered reading about it in the old articles. The families had gathered nearby that Labor Day weekend. It was meant to be one last picnic before school started. The weather turned sour that afternoon. The wind kicked up, and then 5 children simply disappeared, without a trace. Trevor brought the drone lower, curious. The sun hit the well at just the right angle, casting a sliver of illumination down into the darkness. He hovered, adjusted the gimbal, and zoomed. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, something metal catching the sun. But then the shape resolved. Curved handlebars, a bent wheel, a splash of faded red paint still clinging to the frame. Trevor leaned forward, heart kicking in his chest. It was a tricycle. He steadied the drone, angling it for a closer look. Something else jutted from the mud, half buried beside the trike's rear wheel. A small, skeletal hand. Trevor pulled off his headphones. The buzzing in his ears hadn't been from the drone. It was his own pulse, roaring now. He fumbled for his phone with shaking fingers. 911, what's your emergency? He swallowed hard, unable to look away from the screen. My name is Trevor Lance. I'm at Hollow Creek State Park. I think I just found something in the old well, something big. You need to send someone. Now. A pause. Then the dispatcher asked calmly, "Can you tell me what you saw?" Trevor whispered, "I think I just found one of the kids." And then quieter, "I think there's more down there." September 4th, 1989. Location: Hollow Creek, State Park, Texas. The sun beat down on the meadow with the heavy stillness that only late summer knew how to conjure. Cicadas buzzed from the oak trees, and the scent of charcoal, sunscreen, and watermelon thickened the air around the long wooden picnic tables. Paper plates flapped in the breeze. Children shrieked and darted between coolers and folding chairs. It was Labor Day, the final day of the long weekend, and the last time anyone would ever see them. 5 children, all cousins, all gone by sundown. Rita Graham watched the youngest, Frankie, tear across the clearing barefoot, arms windmilling, face flushed. He was chasing after his older brother Toby and their cousins, the Marsh girls, Sadie, and twins, Janie and June. The 5 of them were a pack, all between ages 6 and 10, inseparable and endlessly creative. They'd spent the morning inventing an obstacle course through the trees behind the campground bathrooms, taking turns timing each other with Sadie's pink digital watch. Now they were darting toward the tree line again, their voices trailing off into the woods. "Don't go too far," Rita called, adjusting the straps of her tank top. The sun had been relentless since noon. Sweat prickled the small of her back. "They're fine," said her sister-in-law, Teresa, sipping a can of orange Shasta from a styrofoam cup. "Let 'em burn off whatever they've got left before school starts." The picnic had started with the best of intentions. The Graham and Marsh families, 4 adults, 5 kids, had picked Hollow Creek because it was close, shaded, and quiet. Too quiet, some might later say. The state park had already started shutting down areas that spring due to budget cuts, and the rangers only patrolled it twice a week. A few picnic tables were still maintained, and the water fountain near the parking lot even worked. But the far end of the park, where they'd laid out their blankets and set up the grill, was mostly abandoned. Rita glanced toward the tree line again. No sign of the kids, just the swaying grass and a pair of blackbirds arguing on a limb. "You want me to check on them?" her husband Doug asked, his baseball cap tilted low over his brow. He was elbow deep in hamburger meat, forming sloppy patties beside the grill. "Give it a minute," Rita said. "They know the rules. They'll come back when they're hungry." But they didn't. Not when the burgers were done. Not when Teresa pulled out the red cooler full of ice pops. Not even when Uncle Kenny honked the horn of his pickup twice, an agreed-upon signal that usually had the kids stampeding back with muddy shoes and scraped knees. The woods stayed quiet. At first, the adults weren't worried. Maybe they'd gone further into the trail, exploring that crumbling stone well Sadie had been so fascinated by earlier. Maybe they were daring each other to find the old ranger cabin, long since boarded up. "I'll go walk the loop," Doug said, brushing off his hands. "They're probably poking at frogs down by the gulch again." He returned 20 minutes later, his face several shades paler. "They're not out there. I checked the trailhead, the stream, even the clearing past the fire ring. They're gone." Rita's heart stuttered. "Gone?" "Not a sound," he said, shaking his head. "I called their names for 10 straight minutes. Nothing." Teresa was already rising, knocking over her cup. "That's not funny, Doug." "I'm not joking." Within the hour, they'd searched every trail, every overgrown path, every moss-covered picnic bench. Kenny drove his truck around the park's gravel perimeter road 3 times. The only sign of the kids was Sadie's pink watch, found on a rock beside the old stone well, its digital face cracked, blinking 3:04 p.m. By the time the sheriff's department arrived from Emory, dusk had begun to fall. The woods grew darker by the minute. Flashlights fanned through the brush. Dogs were called in. Helicopters searched by infrared. The well was checked, twice. But there was no sign of the children. No torn shirts, no footprints, no calls for help. Just silence. The park was evacuated and cordoned off. Rangers returned the next morning with specialized teams. The well was drained. The stream was dredged. Divers entered the lake with weighted lines. Every cabin, shed, and pit toilet was checked. Again and again. Nothing. The media came next. Helicopters, cameras, microphones shoved into the faces of weeping mothers. Conspiracy theories bloomed like fungus. Human trafficking, satanic cults, a rogue ranger, a sinkhole. Rita stopped eating. Teresa wouldn't sleep indoors. Kenny drank until his hands shook and never stopped blaming himself. Doug stood by the television for hours, staring into static. The park closed 2 years later, but the families never did. Every year on Labor Day, the 4 remaining adults returned to the same stretch of grass beneath the sagging trees. They'd set out the same blanket, bring the same red cooler, light the grill that never stayed lit, and wait. But no one came. Until now. 36 years later, a drone, a lens, a submerged tricycle covered in mud, and a question no one was ready to answer. Were they down there the entire time? August 30th, 2025, location, Hollow Creek, State Park, Texas. The rescue team arrived in a convoy of 3 trucks, 2 unmarked and 1 bearing the logo of the Texas State Police. The sun had dropped low enough to paint the trees gold, but the shadows pooled deep inside the concrete throat of the old well. It hadn't been touched in decades. Not since the official investigation in '89. Not since the 5 missing posters, printed in the same shade of pink and pale yellow, began to fade from gas stations and diner windows. Now, floodlights rigged to generators hummed to life, bathing the clearing in white-blue glare. Detective Sarah Mendoza stepped out of her SUV and took a long, deliberate look around the abandoned park. Grass came up to her calves. Dead leaves crunched underfoot. The air smelled like mildew, old water, and something faintly metallic. She adjusted her ponytail and turned to the young man who'd made the call. "You're the one who found it?" she asked. Trevor Lance nodded, holding his drone controller like a fragile relic. His hands were shaking. "I wasn't looking for anything, just filming. I do this YouTube series, Forgotten Grounds, and this place has history, like urban legend stuff. I thought it'd get views." "Did you touch anything?" she asked, keeping her tone even. He shook his head quickly. "Number, I swear. I just flew over the well and saw it sticking out of the water. The tricycle. And something else." A shape. Mendoza turned her head slowly toward the well. It sat like a relic from some older world. Circular stone, moss-eaten edges, rusted rebar poking through the cracked cement. The top had been blown open at some point, maybe vandalized, or maybe when they tried to drain it back in '89. A CSI technician crouched beside the rim now, assembling the fiber-optic snake camera that would be lowered first. "What's the depth?" Mendoza asked. "Ground radar shows about 30 feet before bedrock," the tech said. "There's water from the last few months of rain, maybe 3 feet deep, but most of it's muck. Soft sediment, compressed debris. Anything human? Not sure yet." The camera lowered slowly, the feed broadcasting to a nearby monitor. Mendoza leaned in. First came the moss-covered interior, dark and uneven. Then a glimpse of rusted metal, twisted handlebars emerging from the mud like skeletal arms. There it was, the tricycle. One wheel bent completely under, the red paint bleached to a sickly orange. Partially buried beside it, what appeared to be fabric. A child's shoe, Mendoza realized. The kind with tiny lights on the sides. The kind they stopped making decades ago. And then something else. A small arm, bone-thin, paler than the muck around it, skin intact, mummified by the wet. The room went quiet. The tech stopped the feed and stood. "That's human," he said quietly. Mendoza straightened. Her voice didn't waver. "We need full excavation. Call the anthropologist out of San Marcos. Get cadaver dogs in the area, and secure a radius of 50 yards. One officer, standing just off the trail, turned pale. "You think they're all down there?" Mendoza looked back at the screen, at the little shoe, at the handlebar, at the small, delicate arm resting beside it like a forgotten doll's limb. "I think we're about to find out." By midnight, the media had arrived. 1 news van, then 3. By morning, there would be 10. Reporters pressed against the perimeter tape like a tide. Headlines had already begun to circulate online. Breakthrough in 1989. Labor Day disappearance. Tricycle found in Texas well. Missing children case reopened. Is this the resting place of the Hollow Creek Five? At the edge of the crowd, a woman in her 60s stepped down from a weathered pickup and stared through the yellow tape in silence. Her gray hair was tied back, and her hands clutched something small, a laminated missing poster, wrinkled with age. A younger woman climbed out of the driver's side. "Mom," she said gently, "are you sure you want to do this?" Rita Graham didn't answer right away. Her eyes were locked on the well, the same well they'd searched 36 years ago, the same one they were told was empty. "I have to," she said at last. Her daughter, Anna, placed a hand on her arm. "If it's them, if it really is Frankie and Toby and the others, what do you want to happen next?" Rita didn't blink. "I want them home." Detective Mendoza stepped away from the forensics tent and met Rita at the tape line. She'd recognized her from the old case files, from the newspaper clippings, from the haunted expression that hadn't changed since 1989. "Mrs. Graham," Mendoza said, voice low, "I'm Detective Sarah Mendoza. I'm leading the recovery. I'd like to ask you a few questions if you're up for it." Rita nodded, but her gaze never left the well. "They said it was empty, that they checked twice." Mendoza nodded solemnly. "They did. But techniques were different back then. The sonar was limited, and the water was deeper. They didn't excavate the base." "You think they're all in there?" "We won't know until we clear the site. But what we've seen already strongly suggests it's related to the 1989 disappearances." Rita held out the laminated flyer. 5 smiling faces, grainy and bright. "He was 6, she said. Frankie, my youngest, still had his baby teeth. He loved peanut butter crackers and hated loud noises. You remember things like that, even after 3 decades. Mendoza took the flyer with care. "I promise you, we're going to get answers." "Are you sure you're ready for them?" Rita asked, her voice hoarse. "Because once you dig up the truth, it won't stop coming." Mendoza said nothing, just watched as the techs rigged the pulley system and prepared to descend into the earth. Somewhere beneath them, beneath the mud and time and silence, were the final pieces of a mystery that had haunted this town for 36 years. And the question wasn't just who put them there. It was who else knew. August 31st, 2025, location: Hollow Creek State Park, Texas. By morning, the excavation team had reached the first layer of debris at the bottom of the well. The mud was dense, each bucket hauled up with a squelching sound, the water laced with rust and rot. Every few minutes, the team paused to log and bag what they found: rusted nails, rocks, branches, a clump of animal hair. But around 9:47 a.m., the crew chief's radio crackled with urgency. "Detective Mendoza," the voice came through. "We've got something else." She reached the well in seconds, weaving past floodlights and the growing crowd of investigators. 2 techs stood beside a folding table, both pale, one holding a soft bristled brush. On the table sat a faded metal lunchbox. It was decorated with cartoon dinosaurs, bright green stegosauruses and orange T-Rexes. The surface was chipped and dented, but recognizable. Mendoza leaned in. "Jesus," she muttered. The technician gently opened the clasp. Inside, the contents were mostly intact. A plastic sandwich container, a roll of grapefruit leather still in its wrapper, and a name scratched into the lid's underside in childlike handwriting. Toby G. Mendoza closed the lid slowly. Photograph tag, bag. Beside the table sat the second find of the morning, a small white shoe. The sole was warped, the stitching unraveling, but a tiny plastic charm still dangled from the laces, a rainbow. The kind you clipped onto your shoelaces in the late 80s, right before they went out of fashion. The name inside had faded, but a faint ink line could still be seen if tilted toward the light. The forensics team would enhance it later, but Mendoza already knew whose it was: Sadie Marsh, one of the twins. She stepped back and took a deep breath. They weren't just dealing with scattered items. These weren't things dropped by hikers or tossed down by vandals. They were time capsules, preserved, layered, buried, and not by accident. Back at the Emery County Sheriff's Department, in a conference room converted into a command center, a board was being updated in real time. 5 school portraits, yellowed with age, were pinned along the top. Toby Graham, 10. Frankie Graham, 6. Sadie Marsh, 9. Janie Marsh, 8. June Marsh, 8. Below them, fresh evidence photos were taped in rows, each item pulled from the well-cataloged, marked, tagged. Lunchbox, shoe, hair bow, small metal whistle. None of these were listed in the original evidence log, Mendoza said, her voice hard. They were all assumed to be missing with the kids. Sheriff Laird, a barrel-chested man with 25 years in the field and a 1,000-yard stare to prove it, leaned over the table, meaning they never left the park, or someone brought their belongings back later. Laird looked up. You think they were moved? Mendoza nodded. It's possible. There were reports back in '89 of local hunters using the park after hours. One of the early theories was that the kids wandered off and got lost. Maybe someone found them, or something happened, and they dumped the evidence here afterward. But why the well? He asked. Mendoza looked at the recovered tricycle on the monitor. Its front wheel was twisted like a broken wrist. Because it was deep, remote, and unguarded. And because back then, this place wasn't watched the way it is now. She didn't say what she was really thinking. Whoever did this knew the park. They knew its quiet corners, knew how often the rangers came, knew that once the search was over, no one would look again. Until now. Outside the sheriff's office, the media frenzy continued. Reporters pushed microphones at anyone who walked by, while drone footage looped endlessly on news broadcasts. Anchor women in Austin and Dallas declared it the most significant cold case breakthrough in Texas history. For the Graham and Marsh families, it wasn't history. It was their lives. In a small hotel room on the edge of town, Teresa Marsh stood at the mirror, running a comb through her thinning hair. She hadn't spoken much since yesterday's call. Her hands trembled constantly now, sometimes from age, sometimes from something deeper. I don't want to go down there, she said to her daughter Karen, who sat quietly on the bed, folding and unfolding a tissue. Not to that park, not again. Karen looked up. Mom? You don't have to. Detective Mendoza said they'll come to us with updates. Teresa gripped the edge of the sink. That well? I told them in '89. I told them we should have dug it out. But no, just drop a flashlight in and say it's clear. You can't see truth that easy. Karen stood and came to her side. They're listening now, and they found Toby's lunchbox, Janie's shoe. Teresa nodded, but her eyes were fixed on her own reflection. I keep seeing them, Karen. The 5 of them running toward those trees. I remember Sadie looked back at me and smiled, like she was about to tell me a secret. Do you think someone was already out there? Karen asked. Watching them? Teresa didn't answer, just kept staring into the mirror, as if hoping the reflection would give her a different ending. Back at Hollow Creek, the excavation continued into the early afternoon. Around 2:15 p.m., a crew member lifted a bucket from the well and froze. Mendoza crossed to him instantly. What is it? He pulled something from the bucket with gloved hands, careful, slow. A small fabric pouch, waterlogged and discolored. Inside were 5 Polaroid photos, each one sealed in a plastic sleeve, each one showing the same 5 children, standing in the woods, facing the camera, their faces pale, eyes wide, and behind them, in the shadowed trees, a man's silhouette, tall, indistinct, holding something. Mendoza studied the last photo. The man's hand was extended, his finger pointed at the camera, or the person holding it, or maybe at the children. Directly in the lens, Sadie Marsh's face was contorted, mouth open as if in mid-scream. Mendoza handed it to the tech. "We need to pull prints, DNA. I want to know where these were taken and who took them." The tech nodded, already bagging them. Mendoza looked back toward the woods. The sun was starting to fall again, shadows stretching longer, deeper. They had more questions than ever, but now they had faces, evidence, and a killer somewhere who had wanted these children to disappear forever. He hadn't planned on a drone. He hadn't planned on them being found. September 1st, 2025. Location: Emery County Sheriff's Department, Texas. Detective Sarah Mendoza laid the 5 Polaroids side by side beneath a forensic-grade light panel. Each one had been cleaned, scanned, and digitally enhanced by the lab. But there was only so much clarity you could extract from 36-year-old film. Time had faded the edges and left tiny chemical streaks across the children's faces, as if the images themselves were trying to dissolve. But the children were unmistakable. Toby stood in front, his shoulders squared like a boy trying to act older than 10. Janie and June flanked him, the twins in matching overalls with slightly different shoes. Frankie stood behind his brother, half-shadowed, one hand clenched tight. And Sadie, taller than the others, was turned at an angle, one foot stepping forward like she'd been caught mid-run. In every photo, the children looked scared. Not screaming, not crying, just frozen, like someone had told them to stand still. Mendoza leaned in, focusing on the 4th image, the one where Sadie's mouth was open, a clear shape of fear distorting her face. But it wasn't her expression that kept Mendoza up at night. It was the figure in the background. She adjusted the light, increasing the contrast until the man's outline sharpened. He stood just behind the children, obscured by trees. Dressed in jeans, a plain shirt, face in shadow. But he was tall, well over 6 feet, broad shoulders, and in his right hand, something long and thin, a rod maybe, or a pipe. She flagged the image and turned to her partner, Detective Ellen Briscoe, who had been reviewing the original case files. "You ever see any mention of a man like this in the original witness reports?" Briscoe flipped through a highlighted binder. The only strangers mentioned were a pair of teenagers seen fishing by the lake, but they were cleared. Rangers said no unauthorized vehicles entered the park that day, not unless someone came in through the North Fire Road. "The one they don't maintain anymore?" Briscoe nodded grimly. "It's overgrown now, but back then it would have been passable by truck." Mendoza looked back at the Polaroid. He hadn't come to the park by accident. Across town, in a sterile office at the regional FBI field office, a facial recognition analyst sat in front of 6 monitors, slowly scrolling through enhanced overlays of the man's silhouette. The algorithm had rejected hundreds of false positives, unable to identify the figure with certainty. No face, no ID, just a tall man with a weapon-like object and 5 terrified kids. They would need more prints, more DNA, more context. The lead agent made a note to cross-reference any park employees, contractors, or frequent visitors with criminal histories, especially from 1987 to 1991. Something about the man's posture didn't read like panic or accident. It read like control. Rita Graham stood in her living room with the 5 Polaroids laid across her kitchen table. Mendoza had brought them herself, with a counselor present and a box of tissues already opened. Anna sat beside her, silent, her face pale. Rita's hands trembled as she traced each image with her eyes. "That's Toby," she whispered. "And Frankie. God, he was just a baby." She pointed to the 3rd photo, the one where Frankie had a bruise forming near his left eye. That wasn't there when he left that morning. Anna glanced up sharply. "Are you sure?" "Positive. I helped him into his shoes. He was fine. Maybe he fell during the hike," Anna said gently, "or during the game." But Rita shook her head. "Look at Sadie's face. That's not a game." Mendoza sat quietly, taking it all in. "I told them to stay where I could see them," Rita said, her voice growing tighter. "I told them never go into the woods alone, but they weren't alone, were they?" "No," Mendoza said. "They weren't." She flipped open her notebook. "I want to ask you something sensitive." Rita nodded. "In the weeks before the disappearance, was there anyone around the family, at church, school, the neighborhood, who made you uncomfortable? Anyone who took an unusual interest in the children?" Rita furrowed her brow. "There was a groundskeeper. Older man. Quiet. He used to mow the elementary school lawn. I remember once he gave Janie and June some gum without asking permission. Do you remember his name? Number he wore overalls and drove an old brown pickup. But after the kids went missing, I never saw him again." Mendoza made a note. "Did you report it back then?" "I think Teresa might have, but it was chaos. Nobody knew what details mattered." Now everything mattered. In the back of a storage facility on the outskirts of Emory, a woman named Carla Pritchard flipped through a dusty photo album, her hands coated in storage grit. She hadn't opened the thing in decades. It was from her late husband's side, his extended family, mostly forgotten. She paused at a page labeled Summer 1989, Hollow Creek Picnic. There were photos of food, kids playing, women gathered around coolers. Then one photo of a group of kids near the edge of the woods, smiling, unsuspicious. In the background stood a man, not with the group. Off to the side, out of place. He wore a plain shirt and jeans, tall, holding something. Her stomach turned. She pulled the photo out and flipped it over. In faded pen, someone had written, "Harold, friend of Kenny's?" Her hand started to shake. She didn't know a Harold, but she knew Kenny Graham, and she remembered what happened to his nieces and nephews just days after that photo was taken. Detective Mendoza's phone rang at 6:34 p.m. "You need to come to the sheriff's office," Briscoe said. "Now." Mendoza arrived 10 minutes later to find Briscoe standing in the evidence room with a sealed box labeled Case File Number 89-1057, Graham/Marsh Missing. Hollow Creek. Briscoe opened the file and pulled out a stack of photographs. "These were in the original ranger intake from the park," she said. "Taken a few days before the picnic, used for maintenance mapping." Mendoza flipped through them. Shots of fences, trails, benches. Then she stopped. The last photo showed a man kneeling beside the old stone well, holding a clipboard, wearing a work shirt with a patch stitched onto the chest. "Carnes Maintenance and Grounds. Contracted." Mendoza's eyes narrowed. "I just ran the business license," Briscoe said. "The company never existed in any formal registry. No tax ID, no contractor certification. And Carnes?" She pulled up a DMV record. A mugshot from 1998. Arrested for assault in San Antonio. Never charged. Listed height, 6 feet 3 inches. "Charlie Carnes," she said. "He was living less than 30 miles from Hollow Creek in 1989. And he was working, illegally, on state land that summer." Mendoza stared at the photo. At the man kneeling beside the well. At the fake patch, the clipboard, the faint outline of a tool belt. It wasn't a well, it was a grave, and he had prepared it in advance. September 2nd, 2025, location, Karnes County, Texas. The house was small and buried under 30 years of disrepair. Siding peeled from the corners, a satellite dish sagged off the roof, and a wind chime hung lifeless from the porch overhang, rusted and silent. The mailbox read C. Carnes, though the county hadn't had an official address tied to Charlie Carnes since 2004. Detective Sarah Mendoza stood on the front stoop with her hand hovering near her sidearm. She could hear movement inside, slow, deliberate. She exchanged a glance with Briscoe, who stood behind her, one hand already brushing the butt of her taser. They knocked. No answer. They knocked again, harder. A curtain moved. "Mr. Carnes," Mendoza called. "Texas State Police, we need to speak with you about Hollow Creek." The doorknob turned. A creak followed. The man who opened the door was older than she expected, but still large, with wide shoulders and a sun-darkened neck. His eyes were pale and dry, bloodshot around the edges. His clothes hung loose, like they'd once fit a stronger man. "I told you people everything I knew," he said flatly, in '89, and again in '91 when the FBI came around. "You were never listed in the original files," Mendoza said, "because you gave a false name." He blinked. Briscoe held up a laminated photo. "This is you, isn't it? Working next to the well 2 days before the 5 children went missing. Wearing a patch for a fake groundskeeping company. Digging." Carnes didn't look at the photo. He didn't have to. "I remember that job," he said. "I was filling it in." "You expect us to believe that?" Briscoe asked. "No," he said. "I don't expect anything." Mendoza stepped forward. "We've recovered belongings from the well, Mr. Carnes. A tricycle, a shoe, a lunchbox, 5 Polaroids with your silhouette in the background." Still no reaction. "Do you want to tell me how they got down there?" she asked. He leaned one hand on the door frame and stared past them, into the overgrown yard. "That park was wrong long before I got there," he said. "You ever stand in a place that doesn't want you there? Where the air gets thick and the ground doesn't feel right?" "I'm not interested in ghost stories," Mendoza said sharply. 5 children are dead. Their remains have been rotting 30 feet beneath a stone cap for over 3 decades. "I didn't kill them," Carnes said. "Then who did?" He looked back at her, and for the first time, his eyes focused. "Whoever was there before me." They brought him in for questioning. In the interrogation room, Carnes said little, other than the same cryptic insistence. "I didn't dig the well, I finished it." He claimed he was contracted by a man who paid in cash and wore a ranger badge that didn't shine like a real one. Said the job was simple. Clear brush, move stones, and deepen the pit that was already halfway there. "You never thought that was suspicious?" Briscoe asked. "I didn't ask questions. That's why I was hired." "Why use a fake company?" Mendoza pressed. Carnes shrugged. "I had warrants. Couldn't work legally." Mendoza slid a photo across the table, one of the Polaroids recovered from the pouch, the one where Sadie was screaming. Carnes looked at it for a long time. "I saw her once," he said, almost softly. "She was standing by the trees near the gulch, day before the picnic, just watching me." "And you didn't say anything?" "I did," he said. "I waved. She turned and ran." He leaned back. "After the job was done, the man never came back. I left the equipment where he said to. A week later, the kids went missing." "You never told police?" Mendoza asked. "I didn't know it was connected. Not until the news broke. Then I was already halfway to Louisiana." "Convenient," Briscoe muttered. "I didn't hurt them," he said again, "but I helped dig the place they were put." By evening, the evidence log had grown. 3 more items had been recovered from the well. A hair ribbon, still knotted. A pair of plastic binoculars. A tattered, blood-stained hoodie. Rita Graham identified it immediately. "Toby's," she whispered. "I stitched that tear in the shoulder. He ripped it climbing a tree the week before." DNA confirmed it the next morning. The blood was his. Forensic anthropology teams uncovered the first full skeleton the following day. Bones fragile but nearly intact. Small, narrow hips. A tiny jawbone. A child between the ages of 6 and 8. The remains were found curled at the bottom, limbs folded unnaturally, as if the body had been shoved into a corner and covered in sediment. Dental records would confirm it later. It was Sadie Marsh, the first body, not the last. That night, Mendoza couldn't sleep. She sat in her apartment, the caseboard glowing under her kitchen light, the 5 portraits of the missing children staring back at her like ghosts. She reached for her notes, then paused. There was something wrong with the timeline. Carnes had said he was hired to dig after the hole was started, that the man who hired him wore a ranger badge, but wasn't a ranger. If that were true, then who had started the hole in the first place, and why? She dug out the park's archival ranger logs, documents requested the day after the first discovery. There, in a list of 1989 seasonal staff, was a familiar name: Calvin Durrell, part-time assistant ranger, never mentioned in the original investigation. She pulled his file. Born 1946, discharged from military service in 1971, served 2 years on parole for assault with a deadly weapon, employed by the state from 1985 to 1990. Address listed: Hollow Creek Park, Housing Unit 3A. Mendoza picked up the phone. "Get me everything you can on Calvin Durrell. Personnel records, disciplinary actions, neighbors. I want to know where he is, what he drives, and whether he still breathes air." Because Carnes might have dug the well, but Mendoza had a new theory. He didn't build it. Calvin Durrell did. And if he was still alive, he might be the only one left who knew exactly what happened to the other 4 children. September 3rd, 2025. Location: Hollow Creek, Texas. Former park ranger housing. The housing unit, once labeled 3A, was now a crumbling husk of brick and mold. Nature had all but reclaimed it. Ivy covered the porch rails, and thick grass rose like spears through the porch steps. But the foundation still held. The address on the rusted mailbox matched the file: Calvin Durrell. Detective Sarah Mendoza stepped over a fallen screen door and into the living room. It smelled of mildew, old rot, and something faintly sweet. Spilled antifreeze, maybe, or a decaying animal deep within the walls. No lights, no power, but the bones of the old ranger's quarters were still visible beneath the decay. Briscoe followed with a flashlight, panning it over collapsed furniture and buckled floorboards. "Hard to believe anyone lived here," she muttered. "They didn't," Mendoza replied. "Not legally. Durrell moved out in 1990, officially, but that doesn't mean he stayed gone." The walls were covered in tacked-up wildlife posters, yellowed diagrams of local bird species, hunting permit warnings, faded park brochures. On one wall, scratched into the plaster beneath the peeling paint, were 5 hash marks. Briscoe stopped cold. "That a coincidence?" Mendoza didn't answer. They searched the back room, a former bedroom converted into something between a storage den and a fallout shelter. Piles of rags, stacks of water jugs, dozens of labeled boxes. Briscoe opened one. It was filled with Polaroid film, still in original wrappers, expired in 1994. Another box held clothing, children's clothing, torn jackets, sandals, a windbreaker with a cartoon rocket on the back. "Jesus," Briscoe whispered. Mendoza crouched beside a long, shallow trunk. She pried it open carefully. Inside were dozens of photographs, more Polaroids. Many faded beyond recognition, others still disturbingly clear. Most showed children standing in the woods. Some were the same 5 kids, others weren't. One photo, near the bottom, showed the same well they had excavated, years before the current discovery. The cap was intact. Freshly poured concrete covered the opening, and a folding chair sat beside it. In that chair was a man, smiling, holding a shovel across his knees. The date on the back was written in black marker, September 7th, 1989. Done. Later that evening, Mendoza sat across from retired park ranger Norris Tilley, a man in his 70s who'd worked the Hollow Creek system from 1972 to 1991. He lived alone now, outside Waco, and hadn't spoken publicly about the case since his testimony in '89. "You remember Durrell?" she asked. "Too well," he muttered. "Quiet, kept to himself, carried a camera everywhere, said he liked documenting animal paths, but I never once saw him submit a single roll for park inventory. You ever report that?" I tried, but back then nobody wanted to make noise unless it involved money or safety codes. And Calvin didn't drink, didn't steal, just made people uncomfortable. Mendoza leaned in. Did he work the Labor Day weekend? Tilly nodded. He was the only ranger on call that Sunday. I had taken the morning shift but left before noon. He was supposed to lock the gates that evening. But someone kept them unlocked. Tilly's eyes hardened. I checked the logs the next day. Durrell never filed his end-of-day report, just disappeared. And no one followed up. Only until the kids went missing, then everything blew up. But by then Calvin was gone. Where? No one ever found out. By 10 p.m., Briscoe had a lead. A license check showed Durrell's last registered vehicle, a 1982 Dodge camper van, was cited by a traffic cam in rural Oklahoma 6 days earlier. Plate was partially obscured, but the vehicle had been tagged by a wildlife officer who noted suspicious driver behavior near a closed campground. "I want that campground searched," Mendoza said, "and put out a BOLO on Durrell. Use the old DMV photo but tag it with maybe living off-grid and armed." She turned to the growing evidence board, her eyes falling again on the Polaroids. 5 kids in the woods, 1 screaming. And the man behind the lens was smiling. That night, just before midnight, the lab called. DNA taken from the bloody hoodie matched Toby Graham. No surprise. But a secondary sample found beneath his fingernails told a different story. It wasn't Carnes. It wasn't Durrell. It was unknown male DNA, partially degraded, but consistent across at least 2 other recovered items. Janie's hair ribbon and the twins' binoculars. Whoever touched them, grabbed them, was not in the system. Yet, 2 hours later, Mendoza's phone rang again. A Border Patrol team stationed near an abandoned trailhead in Atoka County, Oklahoma, had discovered a campsite deep in the woods. It was overgrown and mostly empty, except for one thing: a wall of photographs nailed to a decaying cabin interior. Most were weather-ravaged beyond repair, but 5 of them were clean, recently placed, kept in plastic sleeves beneath a torn sheet of glass. 5 children, Toby, Frankie, Janie, June, Sadie, all facing the camera, all with eyes blacked out. And below them, scrawled in charcoal, "They stayed quiet." September 4th, 2025. Location: Atoka County, Oklahoma. The trail to the cabin was barely a trail anymore, just a winding scar through dense brush, lined with poison oak, broken branches, and the occasional shotgun shell half buried in dirt. It took the forensics team almost 20 minutes to reach the site from the access road, guided by GPS and the smell of decay. Detective Sarah Mendoza stepped through the cabin door with her hand on her gun. She didn't need it. The place was long abandoned, but not empty. The first thing she noticed was the temperature. Cool. The cabin was shaded by the trees, its structure still mostly intact despite years of rot. The second thing she noticed was the silence. Not birds, not bugs. Just wind. Inside, a thin mattress was laid out against the wall. Rusted food cans were stacked in the corner. In the center of the floor, a circle of ashes, the remnants of hundreds of small fires. Burnt newspaper, bone fragments, metal buttons, and on the wall, held in place with nails and broken glass, were the photos. 5 children. Their faces recognizable despite the age of the prints. Janie's smile, Frankie's unsure stance, Toby's scraped knee. June and Sadie side by side, their hands almost touching. But their eyes, each of them, had been blacked out with thick strokes of marker. Below them, scribbled directly on the wall, the same phrase repeated over and over: "They stayed quiet. They stayed quiet. They stayed quiet." Dozens of times, layered over itself. Some so faint they looked like whispers, others written so hard the charcoal tore into the wood. Mendoza backed away. "He lived here," Briscoe said, standing near the window. "For years." They had found clothes in child sizes, hand-sewn, rope, a box of film cartridges, and under the floorboards, something worse. A torn park ranger badge, a Texas state patch, a revolver wrapped in a child's sweater, one bullet missing from the chamber. Later that day, forensic analysis of the handwriting came back. Preliminary findings suggested 2 contributors, one adult, one child. Mendoza stared at the board back in Emery County and circled a possibility that chilled her to the core. What if one of them was alive long after the others were gone? Briscoe leaned forward. You think he kept one of them? I think he kept them for a while. Maybe longer than we thought, and maybe one of them wrote on that wall. Who? We don't know yet, but we need to find out, because that cabin, that wasn't a dump site. It was a second location. A holding pen, Mendoza said. He took them from Hollow Creek, and at least one of them lived long enough to write a message. That night, the 3rd skeleton was recovered from the well. It was June Marsh. Still wearing the same pink plastic bracelet her mother said she had refused to take off. The body showed no signs of violent trauma, just shallow scratches on the inside of both forearms, defensive wounds. She fought, Mendoza whispered, but not against a weapon. These looked like she was clawing at something. Dirt, stone, wood. Buried alive? Briscoe asked. Or locked in? The autopsy confirmed it. Traces of cedar splinters in her nails, soil in her mouth. June hadn't died instantly. She'd suffocated, and whoever sealed the well had done it knowing she was still breathing. The next morning, a digital archivist from the Texas Historical Preservation Society contacted Mendoza. He'd been reviewing aerial survey photos of Hollow Creek taken by a county drone program in 1990. Most were worthless, just blurry images of grassland and forest. But one image, taken 2 weeks after the disappearances, showed something strange. A set of tire tracks leading from the northern brush line to the exact location of the old well. There was no ranger truck assigned to the park that day, but the tire tread matched a 1982 Dodge camper van, the same one registered to Calvin Durrell. Mendoza's voice tightened. He came back after the search was called off. He didn't just come back, Briscoe said. He finished it. That night, Mendoza called a meeting with the families of the victims. They gathered in the Emery County Courthouse, beneath stained ceiling tiles and flickering lights. The room was silent as she pulled up images. Evidence recovered, photos of the cabin, the wall with the words. The fragments of 5 lives taken and hidden away. When she finished, no one spoke for a long time. Then Rita Graham asked the question everyone was afraid of. How many more are there? Mendoza didn't answer right away. She looked at the evidence board again, at the unnamed children and some of the other Polaroids they'd recovered, at the dates on the boxes found in the cabin, at the ranger logbook still being digitized. I don't know yet, she said honestly. But we're going to find out. September 5th, 2025. Location, Emery County, Texas. Evidence review room. The photos had been stored in silence for over 30 years, tucked inside a tin lunchbox hidden beneath a floorboard of the ranger's cabin. Some were bent, others fused together by heat and time. But 22 of them had survived well enough to digitize. Detective Sarah Mendoza stood over the light table, gloves on, magnifier steady. 5 of the children were already known. Toby, Janie, Frankie, June, Sadie. Their photos had become infamous over the past week, their faces front-page material again. But the others, these weren't the Hollow Creek kids. Some looked younger, some older, different clothes, different haircuts, different seasons, some with snow in the background, others in swimsuits by a riverbank. Most disturbingly, many appeared to be posed in the same unnatural way, standing in a clearing, arms at their sides, eyes fixed on the camera, expression flat. Only a few had writing on the back. Jason, June 1986. Maddie, 1982. Wouldn't stop crying. Tyrell, 1985. Loud but clever. Caitlin, 1984. Buried too shallow. Mendoza swallowed hard. They're not all from Texas, Briscoe said from across the room, cross-checking missing children's reports from surrounding states: Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, New Mexico. She clicked open her laptop. So far, we have 6 possible matches. Possible? Age, clothing, physical appearance, all strong indicators. But DNA will take weeks. If we even have DNA, Mendoza tapped one of the photographs. A boy, maybe 10 years old, wearing a Boy Scout shirt. His front teeth were missing. His hands looked scraped. The back of the photo read, Ryan. Fought hard. Briscoe's voice was low. This isn't a cold case anymore. This is serial. 2 hours later, forensic analysis on the revolver found in the cabin came back. 1 partial fingerprint had survived, trapped under the trigger guard. It didn't belong to Durrell, and it didn't belong to Carnes. It belonged to Sadie Marsh, age 11, presumed deceased in 1989, but her remains had not yet been recovered. Mendoza stared at the report, then back at the photos, her pulse tightening. She held the gun, she whispered, maybe just once, maybe at the end. Briscoe sat forward. What if she tried to stop him? Or what if she succeeded? They re-examined the body count. 3 sets of remains recovered from the well: Janie, June, and Toby. 1 missing, Frankie, but presumed to be among the bone fragments now being sifted. 1 child still unaccounted for, Sadie Marsh. The oldest? The one who screamed in the Polaroid. The one who'd stood in front of the others in almost every frame. The one who'd been protective, smart, and angry. That evening, while digging deeper into Park Service logs from 1990, Briscoe discovered a previously overlooked incident report from a campground in Caddo Lake, filed 7 months after the Hollow Creek disappearances. The report described a young girl in a tattered dress, wandering barefoot near the trees. By the time rangers arrived, she was gone. Witnesses described her as pale, bruised, with short, tangled dark hair and wide, dark eyes. The report was dismissed at the time. No missing persons were filed that day. No child was reported lost. But the description matched Sadie Marsh perfectly, and the date? April 7th, 1990. 7 months after she vanished. Are you saying she escaped? Rita Graham's voice shook as she stared at the evidence board. We think she may have, Mendoza said quietly. Or at least, she got away, even briefly. But why wouldn't she come home? Maybe she was hurt, maybe she was being hunted, or maybe she didn't believe she could come home. Rita closed her eyes. She would have been 12. Mendoza nodded. Do you think she survived after that? Rita asked. I don't know. But if she did, there's a chance she left more behind than just photos. They reviewed the interior of the cabin again. Every nail, every board. It was Briscoe who spotted it this time. A plank near the bottom of the wall, marked faintly in pencil. If I'm gone, dig under the stove. S. They tore the stove out with crowbars and drills, hands sweating, breath held. Underneath, wrapped in plastic and duct tape, was a metal container. Inside, a notebook. Water-damaged but legible. It wasn't written by an adult. It was a child's handwriting, tight, careful, frantic. On the first page, my name is Sadie Marsh. I'm 11. I don't know what day it is. He took us on the last day of summer. He said we were going to stay forever. The final page. I think I'm the only one left now. I hid the gun. If he comes back, I'll shoot. If I don't make it, please tell my mom I tried. Mendoza closed the notebook with trembling hands. She looked over at Briscoe, eyes burning. She didn't just survive, she whispered. She fought. And maybe, just maybe, she won. September 6th, 2025, location, Emery County Sheriff's Department. The notebook sat on the evidence table like a lit fuse. Every page had been scanned, photographed, bagged. The handwriting had already been verified by a forensic linguist, consistent with a child aged 10 to 12. Slant, pressure, syntax. But there was something else Mendoza couldn't shake as she flipped through the pages again in silence. Sadie hadn't just written for herself. She'd written to be found. Most children, trapped or dying, left desperate scratches, names, prayers. But Sadie wrote like someone documenting a crime, a timeline. She listed dates, names, sounds she heard in the night. She wrote what he fed them, cans with no labels. She described the smell of lime in the well. She said the ground moved after the third one was taken away. "She saw them die," Mendoza whispered. "All of them." And then she wrote something neither Mendoza nor Briscoe could stop rereading. "He stopped calling me Sadie after Janie was gone. He called me number 5. Briscoe looked up. "It was a countdown." Mendoza nodded. And when she was the only one left, she knew what that meant. But Sadie didn't fold. She observed. She listened. She learned the way his boots sounded on the floorboards, the way he always came in through the back, how he never locked the trunk completely. "She waited for a chance," Mendoza said, "and when it came, she took it." The lab confirmed it that morning. The DNA found on the revolver matched the DNA from the inside corner of the notebook pages. Sadie had held both, and someone else's blood was on the grip of the gun. A man's, likely Calvin Durrell's. That night, a call came from McCurtain County, Oklahoma. A hiker found a human skull inside a collapsed ravine along a dried riverbed about 30 miles from the ranger cabin. The skull was small, missing 2 teeth, partially buried under a pile of stones, wrapped in a plastic garbage bag. Near it, a few scraps of decayed cloth, a tattered blue shirt, a button with a cartoon frog. Mendoza's breath caught when the sheriff emailed her the photo. Rita Graham identified it the next morning. "Frankie's favorite," she said quietly. "He wore it almost every day." Autopsy confirmed the skull belonged to a male child, approximately age 7 to 9. Blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. Death was quick. "Sadie didn't bury him," Briscoe said. "He did." And she saw it. She probably waited until he left, then ran. But why leave the others? She couldn't get them out, Mendoza said. And maybe she knew they were already gone. The final entry in the notebook was written in jagged, uneven letters. "I did it. I'm sorry. I had to. I couldn't wait for him to come back. He bled a lot. I ran. I don't know where I'm going. I hope someone finds this. I don't want to disappear like them." There was no signature. Just the final letter S, written 3 times, scratched deeper than the others. In a press conference the next morning, Mendoza stood before a crowded room of cameras and journalists. "We believe that Sadie Marsh may have survived for weeks, possibly months, after the disappearance of the others. We believe she escaped captivity, wounded her abductor, and may have left behind key evidence that helped us reopen this case." The flashbulbs went off like fireworks. "What happened to her?" one reporter shouted. "We're still working to confirm," Mendoza said, her voice calm but tight. "Right now, we believe she died shortly after escaping, somewhere in the woods between Hollow Creek and the Oklahoma border. And the man responsible? We're building a case. There are still pieces missing, but we believe Calvin Durrell was the prime actor. We also believe he had help." Briscoe stepped forward and held up a digitally enhanced photo, one taken from the notebook's back cover, which had an imprint of a partial palm print pressed in charcoal. The print did not match Durrell, or Carnes, or Sadie. It matched a man arrested in 1993 for attempted abduction in Arkansas. Name: Eldon Hasker, former handyman. No known residence. Drifted between state parks as a campground volunteer. No fingerprints on file until a bar fight 25 years ago. He disappeared in 1994. Until now, he'd been a ghost. And he had just reappeared on the final page of Sadie's notebook. That night, Mendoza stood alone at the well. The excavation was still ongoing. More bones were being cataloged, most likely from Janie and June. But no trace of Sadie had been found here. She hadn't died in that well. She died somewhere else. Or maybe... She's not dead, Mendoza said aloud. The wind picked up, swirling dust across the grass. She ran, she whispered. She ran, and she left a message. Not for help, not for mercy, for justice. And someone had buried that message under a stove, thinking it would never be found. But they were wrong. Sadie Marsh had done more than survive. She had written the story herself. September 7th, 2025. Location, Paris, Texas. Hollow Creek County Archives building. The room smelled like dust, film, and 30 years of silence. Sarah Mendoza sat at a microfiche viewer in the back of the county archives, flipping through the reels slowly. These weren't police records or park logs. They were mall photo booth strips, hundreds of them, dumped in a cardboard box labeled Arcade, 89 to 95. You really think she'd end up in a strip mall? Briscoe had asked earlier that morning. Mendoza had nodded. If she escaped, if she was alone, she might have wandered through places with people, cameras, lights, somewhere she thought someone might see her. That's what made her stop on Reel 17B. 3 frames, low-res, grainy, poorly lit, but unmistakable. A girl, late preteen, thin, face bruised, hair tangled, standing stiffly in front of a patterned curtain, eyes wide and unsmiling. 2nd frame, same girl. But someone else is behind her now, barely visible. A man's arm entering from the side, grabbing her shoulder. 3rd frame, the girl's mouth is open. Not smiling, not laughing, shouting. The photo strip was time-stamped October 4th, 1989. 1 month after the Hollow Creek picnic. 1 month after Sadie Marsh disappeared, and the arcade where the photo was taken, torn down in 1992. The photo strip was scanned, enlarged, and enhanced. Facial reconstruction. A. I mapped the girl's features against Sadie's 4th grade yearbook portrait. Match, 91.4% probability. The arm in the 2nd frame was measured against known proportions and injuries of Calvin Durrell. Not a match, but in frame 3, a sliver of a face was visible. Glasses, crooked jaw, partial scar across the cheekbone. They ran it through the system. Eldon Hasker. Confirmed. The man who disappeared in 1994. Sadie had escaped Durrell, but been taken again. Only this time she left a camera record. Not a Polaroid. A witness. By late afternoon, Mendoza and Briscoe had tracked Hasker's last known movements to a service station on the Arkansas-Texas border. He'd worked as a mechanic under a different name. Disappeared again in 1996 after a fire destroyed part of the garage. No body was ever recovered, but something else was. A lunchbox, burned, scorched, sealed shut, found in a crawl space under the back office. Inside were bones, small, brittle, a child's femur, and a handful of teeth. No ID was ever made, but now, with Sadie's DNA in the system, taken from the notebook, the revolver, the notebook's edges, they had something to test against. They sent the remains to the lab and waited. That night, Mendoza went back through the notebook again. Something had been bothering her for days. Something about the word countdown. 5 kids, 5 entries in the early pages. One by one, taken or killed. But on the final page, Sadie wrote something strange. I heard him say the numbers again, but he started at 6. 6. There were 5 children, Briscoe said. That we know of. What if there was another? Mendoza asked. A 6th child we didn't know about. One that didn't belong to the picnic group. An accomplice? Number A allude. They pulled the Polaroids again. One photo, different from the rest. A boy, maybe 8. Not one of the Hollow Creek 5. Dated July 1989. Before the picnic, before the trap. And scrawled beneath it, he screamed for days. 6 was too loud. The lab called just before midnight. The remains found beneath the burned garage. Not Sadie. Age estimate. Male child, age 6 to 8. Likely dead prior to October 1989. DNA. Not in the system. Sadie wasn't buried there. She had escaped. Again. Briscoe looked up from her monitor, her voice tight. If she made it through Hasker, she's out there somewhere, Mendoza said. Dead? I don't know. They stared at the board. 3 confirmed bodies. 1 likely. 1 missing. Sadie. No grave, no confirmed death. No obituary. No closure. But too many clues left behind to be coincidence. Sadie had fought back. She'd left a trail, and maybe, just maybe, she lived. September 8th, 2025. Location, Denton, Texas, Social Services Records Division. The clerk was young, maybe 21, and visibly nervous. We don't usually get homicide detectives, she said, her voice trembling as she slid a box of old intake forms across the desk. These are foster home transfer cases from 89 to 91, all unclaimed minors placed without documentation. It was a mess back then. Detective Sarah Mendoza nodded, already slipping on gloves. Briscoe leaned close. You think she ended up in foster care? If she was hurt and scared and didn't tell them who she was, maybe. Maybe she didn't remember. Or maybe she gave a different name. Mendoza opened the box. Each file was brittle, faded, curled with heat and time. Some had only a first name. Others just a note from a social worker. Found wandering Highway 259, no ID. Estimated age 10 to 12, nonverbal. Won't sleep indoors. That file was dated October 15th, 1989. 2 weeks after the arcade photo. The intake name, April. Hair, dark. Eyes, brown. Clothes, torn blue dress. Found with a toy button sewn into the sleeve of her jacket. A frog. Mendoza's fingers froze. Frankie's favorite button. April had stayed at Clearview House for Girls from October 89 to March 90. Then, without explanation, she disappeared from the system. No adoption records, no transfer logs. Just a blank form, a box checked, ABAWAL, presumed runaway. But the notes were more telling. One social worker wrote, wakes up screaming, scratches at walls, refuses mirrors, won't say her real name, but every night she writes the same word over and over, June, sometimes Sadie. Another note, dated February 22, 1990, said simply, she asked me if the well was still open. Briscoe read it aloud. She remembered. Mendoza whispered, and no one believed her. Clearview House had closed in 1996 after a fire destroyed 2 wings. The remaining records had been boxed and sent to county storage. But one employee, Mrs. Rowena Darby, now 74, still lived in Denton. Mendoza tracked her down at a quiet senior complex near the edge of town. April, Rowena said when shown the photo. Yes, quiet girl, sharp eyes. Wouldn't talk to anyone but the cook. Always had that look like she was listening to something behind the wall. Did she ever tell you her real name? No, Rowena said. But I remember one thing. She made me swear. I'd keep something. She shuffled into a back room and returned with a rusted lunch tin, charred on one side. Inside was a folded piece of paper, aged and yellow. The handwriting was jagged, uneven, but familiar. If I disappear again, don't forget what happened. Don't let him find the others. I wrote it all down. I made sure. Please give this to someone who'll believe me someday. S. Mendoza sat back, blood draining from her face. She left a second message. DNA confirmed it within 36 hours. April, from the Clearview house. Sadie Marsh from Hollow Creek. Same person. Sadie had lived. She had escaped not once, but twice. She had written the story. She had buried the evidence. She had fought and clawed and documented everything, then disappeared again into the system. But she had survived into 1990, and no one ever saw her again. Until now, the forensic sketch artist, using the childhood photos, the Clearview records, and the arcade image, built a predictive composite, what Sadie Marsh might look like at 47 years old. Briscoe stared at it for a long time. "I've seen her," she said. Mendoza turned. "Where?" Briscoe's eyes narrowed. "Not in real life. In the crowd. When they uncovered the third body at Hollow Creek, there was a woman standing at the edge of the barrier. Hat, sunglasses, watching." She pulled up the surveillance video. Frame by frame, they analyzed the crowd. There she was, standing still, not filming, not crying, just watching, for exactly 41 seconds, then gone. They ran the facial data through DMV and Social Security databases. Nothing. No license, no medical records, no taxes, no trace. But there was one more hit. A bank surveillance camera, 3 years earlier, in Amarillo. A woman fitting Sadie's composite walked into a credit union and left a folded paper in the lobby donation bin. It was for a missing children's advocacy fund. The donation, exactly $5. Signed, SM. September 10th, 2025, location, Hollow Creek State Park, Texas. The wind had shifted. It moved through the trees like breath through old lungs, stirring ash from fire pits long gone cold, rustling leaves along the forgotten trails where children once ran. Detective Sarah Mendoza stood at the edge of the well, now fully excavated. What had once been buried beneath layers of dirt, stone, and bureaucratic denial was now exposed to air, light, and truth. They'd recovered enough bones to account for all 5 children. All but one, Sadie Marsh. The medical examiner's report confirmed it. The DNA from the remains pulled from the well matched Janie, June, Toby, and Frankie. But not Sadie. Sadie had never gone into the well. She had written about it, feared it, heard the others from inside it, but she hadn't been buried there. She had escaped. Again. The final piece came from a VHS tape found inside a box labeled Archival Footage, Parks and Wildlife, 1990. It had been digitized by a university intern during a mass transfer of analog state archives. Mendoza received it late. She watched in silence as the grainy footage played. A ranger walking through Hollow Creek after the search had ended, giving a half-hearted tour of the park's features. "Closed until further notice," the man mumbles. Then the camera pans, and there, for less than 4 seconds, standing between the trees, is a girl. Still, watching, dark hair, arms crossed over her chest, no shoes. The ranger doesn't notice, but the camera does. Sadie Marsh, spring, 1990, alive. The evidence board at Emory Sheriff's Department was now full. Red string, faded photos, handwriting samples, photo booth stills, foster care documents, maps. Everything pointed in one direction. Sadie had escaped, and Sadie had never stopped watching. Not from fear, from purpose. She hadn't just wanted justice. She wanted to make sure it never happened again. Mendoza circled the final word she'd found on the back of Sadie's hidden notebook. Not a sentence, not a goodbye. Just one word, scrawled over and over again in pencil until the wood beneath had splintered. Remember. 2 days later, a new team uncovered an underground cache beside the cabin. Buried deep beneath layers of cedar and ash was a sealed ammo box coated in oil and mud. Inside, notebooks, all in Sadie's handwriting, detailed descriptions of other children, faces, names, parks, towns, states, cross-referenced with missing persons files from 1984 to 1991. 17 additional cases matched. She had been tracking him, Eldon Hasker, possibly Calvin Durrell, and whoever else was part of it. She'd been leaving breadcrumbs. And someone, maybe another child, maybe a rescuer, maybe Sadie herself, had been burying them in places no one would think to look. Until now. Mendoza held a press conference the following morning. This was never just about one park, or one day, or 5 missing children. It's about a system that failed to protect them. It's about one girl who tried to tell the truth and was ignored. She lifted the photo of Sadie Marsh, age 11. Then the photo composite of her at 47. If you know this face, or believe you've seen her, please come forward. We're not issuing a warrant. We're not charging her. We are looking for answers. And if she's still out there, we owe her that much. Later that week, someone left an envelope outside the sheriff's office door. No name, no return address. Inside was a single Polaroid. A stone well, cracked, empty. A folded piece of notebook paper taped to the back. In familiar handwriting, I made sure no one else ends up down there. The well is still open, so they'll remember. Essie. September 15th, 2025. Location, Hollow Creek Memorial Site. A plaque stands near the edge of the forest now. Beneath it, 5 names etched in brass. Toby Graham, Janie Marsh, Frankie Graham, June Marsh, Sadie Marsh. Presumed alive, 1989. Beside the plaque is a bench. Visitors come now, to mourn, to sit, to read the stories posted on laminated signs. School buses pull up. Children learn their names. At the base of the well sits a small, faded pink digital watch. Still blinking. 3:04 p.m. The moment they disappeared. And just beneath the stone rim, in newly carved letters, she stayed quiet. Then she spoke. And someone finally listened,